The family caretaker, a Jungian path to liberation. There is a particular loneliness that inhabits those who carry the world on their shoulders without anyone ever asking if they desired such a burden. How is it possible that someone becomes, from childhood, the pillar that sustains ruins they did not build? The question echoes in the silence of thousands of souls who grew up being the adults of their own families, children who learned to silence their own cries to better hear others' moans. Carl Jung, the explorer of the darkest and brightest territories of the human psyche, dedicated his life to understanding these invisible labyrinths we inhabit. Born in 1875, this Swiss psychiatrist revolutionized our understanding of the hidden mechanisms that govern the human soul, revealing that we are far more vast and complex than our consciousness can encompass. His discoveries about the collective unconscious archetypes and the individuation process offer a compass for navigating the turbulent waters of modern existence, especially when we find ourselves imprisoned in roles we never consciously chose. Jung understood that each family is a microcosm where archaic and primitive forces manifest through apparently everyday dynamics. The family caretaker is born from this invisible alchemy, emerging as a figure who transcends their chronological age, to embody the archetype of the universal caregiver. This transformation does not happen by chance or personal preference, but arises from a complex dance between family necessity and individual psychic structure. Jung spoke of the shadow as that part of us we reject, repress, or ignore. For the family caretaker, the shadow often contains not only the destructive aspects of personality, but also the spontaneous child, the vulnerable being who needs care, the person who has the right to be imperfect and dependent. Ironically, by assuming the role of the one who cares, the caretaker projects their own infantile shadow onto other family members, perpetuating a cycle where they become increasingly isolated from their own humanity. The family dynamic then becomes her theater where everyone plays crystallized roles, the caretaker as the tireless savior, the others as those who eternally need salvation. This dynamic creates a subtle but devastating codependency, where the caretaker secretly feeds the chaos they claim to combat, for their identity is so intertwined with the savior role that they cannot imagine who they would be without others. Problems to solve. The price of this dynamic manifests in subtle but profound ways. The caretaker develops a chronic sense of emptiness, as if they were a bottomless well that can never be filled, no matter how many people they help or how many problems they solve. There is an existential fatigue that goes beyond physical tiredness, an exhaustion of the soul that no period of rest can cure. Intimate relationships become minefields, as the caretaker can only connect through the caregiver role, feeling lost when they encounter someone who does not need to be saved. Sexuality and creativity often become compromised, as these vital forces require a connection with the authentic self that was long ago sacrificed on the altar of family responsibility. The caretaker often reports feeling like an actor who has forgotten their true identity, playing a role for so long that they can no longer distinguish between the persona and the real being. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming who we really are, requires a courageous confrontation with these crystallized patterns. For the family caretaker, this process begins with the painful recognition that their savior identity may be, paradoxically, preventing true healing and growth for both themselves and those they try to help. The first step of this journey is developing the capacity to witness without judgment their own compulsion to save others, observing how anxiety arises when someone close is in difficulty and they do not intervene immediately, noticing how their self-esteem fluctuates depending on how useful they can be to others, recognizing that behind apparent generosity there may exist a desperate need for control and an inability to tolerate their own vulnerability. This observation is not made to generate guilt, but to create space. Space between the automatic impulse to save and action. Space where other possibilities can emerge. Space where the wounded child within the caretaker can finally find their voice and express their own needs repressed for decades. The healing process involves deep mourning, mourning for the time lost caring for others when they should have been discovering themselves, mourning for the childhood they never had, for the dreams they sacrificed, for the parts of themselves they abandoned, to become what others needed them to be. This mourning is not self-pity, but a necessary recognition of the real loss that occurred. Simultaneously, the caretaker needs to learn the delicate art of establishing boundaries without feeling guilty. This requires a fundamental recalibration of their nervous system, which was conditioned to interpret any refusal to help as a threat to their own survival. They need to develop a new emotional language, learning to express their own needs without feeling them as a burden to others. The family, in turn, may react with resistance to these changes. The caretaker may face accusations of selfishness, emotional manipulation, or attempts to reactivate old patterns through more intense crises. It is crucial to understand that this resistance is not necessarily malicious, but a reflection of a system that learned to function in a certain way and now needs to find a new balance. Jung spoke of the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity, to find a third way that transcends apparently irreconcilable oppositions. For the caretaker, this function can manifest as the discovery that it is possible to care for others without losing themselves, to be generous without sacrificing themselves, to be strong without carrying the world on their shoulders. This transformation does not happen all at once, but through small acts of courage repeated day after day. Each time the caretaker chooses to honor their own need, each moment they resist the automatic impulse to solve a problem that is not theirs, each occasion they allow others to experience the natural consequences of their choices, they are rebuilding their identity on more authentic foundations. True freedom for the caretaker is not in completely abandoning their caregiver role, but in consciously choosing when and how to exercise it. When care arises from an integrated self instead of a neurotic compulsion, it becomes an expression of genuine love instead of an invisible prison. The individuation process for the family caretaker is a journey back home, to themselves. It is learning that their existence has value, independent of their usefulness to others. It is discovering that they can be loved not for what they do, but for what they are. It is recognizing that their own healing and happiness are not selfish luxuries, but necessary prerequisites for any authentic contribution to others' well-being. As the caretaker learns to nurture the wounded child within themselves, something miraculous happens. Their capacity to be present with others deepens, but now it comes from a place of abundance instead of emptiness. Their relationships become more genuine because they no longer need to maintain a facade of constant strength. Their creativity flourishes because it is no longer being channeled exclusively into solving others' problems. The final paradox is that by stopping trying to save everyone, the caretaker often discovers that their positive influence on others multiplies. When they model an authentic and balanced life, they offer a much greater gift than all their previous rescue attempts. They demonstrate that it is possible to live differently. The journey of the family caretaker is, ultimately, an archetypal journey of death and rebirth. Death of the false identity built upon self-denial, rebirth of an integral human being capable of giving and receiving love in a balanced way. It is the movement from a reactive existence to a creative life, from survival based on fear to abundance based on trust. In this transformation process, the caretaker does not lose their capacity to care, but recovers it in a much more powerful and sustainable way. They learn that the greatest gift they can offer others is their own integrity, their own courageous journey toward authenticity. Because when someone has the courage to break invisible chains that bind them to self-destructive patterns, they offer silent permission for others to do the same. The healing of the family caretaker resonates through generations, breaking ancestral cycles of codependency and creating new possibilities for human relationships. It is a revolutionary act of love, both for themselves and for those they love, to recognize that carrying the world on their shoulders is not noble. It is just a sophisticated way of hiding from their own humanity. In the end, the caretaker's greatest responsibility is to themselves, the responsibility to live their own life, to honor their own dreams, to nurture their own soul. because only then can the invisible weight finally be transformed into visible strength, and the ancestral burden into wings to fly toward true freedom.